The rumour mill that Christopher Nolan could direct a future Bond film has been running for about as long as the prospect of Idris Elba playing James Bond. That is to say, for about as long as Bond fans can remember.
It's exhausting.
As of recording, nothing official or concrete has ever come of this, despite Nolan having reportedly met with producers Barbara Broccoli and Michael G. Wilson multiple times. Broccoli was interviewed by Slash Film back in 2012 and had this to say when prompted about the possibility of Nolan directing a future Bond film. Well, we're huge fans of Chris Nolan. Obviously, we had met him many years ago and he has been, you know, in charge of the whole Batman series, so there wasn't really an opportunity for us to work together. I think he's a great director. I think we're really happy with Sam and hope that we'll continue working with Sam. Don't know whether Chris will ever do one of these. And in an interview with Playboy back when promoting his 2017 film Dunkirk, Nolan seemingly couldn't have been more keen on the prospect. I've spoken to the producers Barbara Broccoli and Michael G. Wilson over the years. I deeply love the character and I'm always excited to see what they do with it. Maybe one day that would work out. You'd have to be needed, if you know what I mean. It has to need reinvention. It has to need you. And they're getting along very well. Well, if there was ever a time for reinvention, it's now. Good evening, Mr. Bond fans. Christopher Nolan has been on the promotional circuit for Oppenheimer recently, and news has started recirculating about his keenness to potentially direct a future Bond film after this interview with Josh Horowitz of the Happy, Sad, Confused podcast.
$20 says you're going to direct the next Bond movie.
I love those movies. The influence of those movies on my filmography is embarrassingly apparent. It would be an amazing privilege to do one. At the same time, when you take on a character like that or work like that, you're working within a particular set of constraints.
Yes.
And so it's a kind of responsibility I felt very much taking on Batman.
Of course. And I would imagine you'd want to be involved in casting your Bond.
Well, everything. I mean, you don't, you know, the thing, you wouldn't want to take on a film not fully committed to what you could bring to the table creatively.
Again, in that interview, Nolan talks about it wanting to be the right moment, the right time, and with the first film of each new Bond actor arguably being the most important film in their tenure as the character, it feels like the time couldn't be righter.
Good. Right on schedule.
As I say, rumours of Nolan directing a Bond film have been circulating for years. I've spoken about them before, and I think they've always been exactly that. Rumours. However, I feel like we're coming into now or never territory. Based on previous comments, I can't imagine that Nolan would be so keen on the prospect of helming an actor's second or third outing. He has yet to publicly commit to a further project after Oppenheimer, and there has seemingly been no movement on Bond 26 at all, so it all feels right? I have a real conflicting head and heart mentality over whether or not I actually like the idea of Christopher Nolan directing a Bond film. I'm going to go through some of the reasons why I'm conflicted about this in this video. Obviously, please do let me know your own thoughts on this subject in the comments section below. This is very much my therapy session, getting these thoughts out there, and if anyone can comment and help me come to a more concrete conclusion, then please do. But I'm going to start with how my head thinks, and my head feels like it's a great idea, you idiot! Nolan is one of the most bankable, reliable names directing big-budget feature films today. His filmography has been largely accepted with great to outstanding reviews and solid to phenomenal box office. Like a Steven Spielberg or a Jordan Peele, Nolan movies are part sold on the strength of his name, and a new era of Bond could surely use all the bankability it can get. His filmography is full of Bond-esque scenes and sequences. Inception and Tenet in particular are films with huge Bondian vibes, and in terms of reinventing a popular character, he had great success with the Dark Knight trilogy. I imagine that his Bond film, or indeed films, would be a case of sticking those 5 films in a blender and adding a dash of vodka and a good deal of sex appeal for taste. Especially given the current state of theatrical releases and box office receipts, the producers at Eon must be at least a little tempted by the surefire-ness of giving the director's seat over to someone like Nolan. Presumably, the director would also be bringing with him a whole host of ideas and scenarios for what he would like to do with Bond, and he's clearly been thinking about this for some time. I'd be very surprised if he didn't already have a completed Bond film ready to go in his head. And that's not to say that other directors wouldn't. I'm sure that every director working today has an idea of what they'd like to do with their own Bond film, but especially given the silence from Eon since No Time to Die's release, maybe they need a strong voice like like Nolan to come in and confidently take the reins. I don't think it's controversial of me to say that the Daniel Craig era was handled very differently to previous actors' tenures, and this was in part due to the producer's fondness for Daniel Craig, and he was seemingly granted a great deal more creative control than many of his predecessors. Barbara Broccoli has said in multiple interviews that she'd love to continue making Bond movies with Daniel Craig forever, so if they're having a hard time conceiving of what could possibly come after him, if they wanted to take the no-brainer easy approach, you do have an A-list director right there bursting with ideas. But that could also explain some of the Eon hesitancy for wanting to bring in someone like Christopher Nolan. You're bringing in a director, writer, producer who is at a place in his career where he can have full creative control over seemingly any film he wants to make. Universal let him make a 3-hour-long, R-rated, partially black and white biographical drama film about the man who made the atomic bomb, for goodness sake. If that doesn't say Hollywood clout, I don't know what does. Eon might have a bit of hesitancy given what happened with Danny Boyle on the production of what became No Time to Die, where we saw what happens when a prolific director digs their heels in over certain creative choices where they may be in disagreement with the producers and star. And this leads me on to what my heart has to say about the matter, which is...
It's a terrible idea. Do you think Nolan can
really give you the fun Bond film you've been going on endlessly about wanting? Yeah, my main hesitation comes down to the fact that as much as I have liked to loved every Nolan film I've seen, and I've seen all but 2 of his films as of recording, Following and Insomnia are the ones that I haven't seen, for those wanting to know, I can't help but feel that his house style might not necessarily gel with the lighter, more frivolous tones I've been yearning for a return for in Bond since the somewhat more serious and dour tone of some of the Craig entries. I think of Nolan as a serious filmmaker, even when dealing with fantastical elements like comic book superheroes and villains, and while many of his films have moments of humour, they are often incredibly dry, I tend to find anyway, and I think it works with the films that he makes, and if he were to take that into Bond, I can't imagine that we'd have something much different from what we got throughout much of the Craig era. And hey, 2 out of 5 Daniel Craig films I really adore, and I'll admit that a part of this feels like the snake is eating itself, since films like Skyfall and Spectre feel very influenced by Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight films. So just tonally speaking, I don't know if a Christopher Nolan Bond film would give us something different to what we've already seen, where they were quite clearly trying to emulate some of his style. I kind of subscribe to Edgar Wright's theory about light chocolate, dark chocolate when it comes to Bond films, and I can't help but feel that a Christopher Nolan Bond film would be 99% cocoa. And yeah, I suppose that when I really boil it all down, that is ultimately what my reservations about a Christopher Nolan directed Bond film comes down to, the fact that I don't feel like we would be getting something very different. I feel like, if anything, it would feel like more of the same. However, I can't deny the bankability of Nolan's name and how that bankability would translate to him leading a new era of Bond for 1, 2, or maybe even 3 films. Eon are gonna be on a bit of an uphill struggle, I think, with whoever they cast as the next Bond, particularly given how popular the Daniel Craig films have been with the public. I think that no matter whoever they announce, there's going to be some blowback, there is going to be plenty of difference of opinions, so why not mitigate some of that by getting yourself an incredibly bankable, tried and tested filmmaker to take the helm? Nolan's love and passion for cinema and the theatrical experience is something else that kind of wins me around to the argument, to be perfectly honest. He had a very public fallout with Warner Brothers over streaming versus theatrical, and he's taking his projects to other studios now, and Eon Productions are very much in that same vein. They are also big advocates of the theatrical experience. They, you know, really held out with No Time to Die to make sure that they could get that theatrical experience and not just put it straight onto streaming during the pandemic when all of the cinemas were closed. So it really could be a match made in heaven. Until it turns out that Eon Productions now want to kill off Bond in every single installment, and they just run through every major director in Hollywood until they're completely run out. Do let me know your thoughts on this subject in the comments section below. I feel like the vast majority of fans are really in favor of this, certainly from what I see on Twitter and online and everything. People are really, like, going for this, and I really wish that I could be on that same train. I just have those little hesitations that kind of are holding me back. I think maybe I would kind of prefer someone like Edgar Wright to be announced as director, but that being said, on paper, I think Nolan makes an awful lot of sense, and I certainly wouldn't be disappointed if he were to be announced as director. I just don't know if I'm fully excited about the prospect, but feel free to change my mind. Feel free to get me excited if you indeed are, and you want to share your enthusiasm in the comment section below. Also below, there are links to my various social media pages, as well as the subscribe button and the Mrs. Bell notification button if you want to stay super up to date on future video uploads. And with all that being said, and until next time, Bond fans, so long for now.